So there is something more fundamental about humanity right now that makes us pay for everything, even things that are God given to this world. So
Mhm.
if we had free energy, it wouldn't be free for long. In order to prove that any one thing exists, it suffices to exhibit one. For example, metal cooking dishes exist. Magnets exist. Plastic putty knives, or whatever you call these, do exist. Free energy exists. Now meet Dr. Moray King.
So I started out going University of Pennsylvania and undergraduate in electrical engineering. So I was really good at computer programmer back then. This is the late '60s, and got jobs as working for professors as a programmer. And as I was learning electrical engineering. And then I eventually went to graduate school in system engineering and was pursuing a PhD in system engineering. And what happened was I was really into, early on, I loved AI, that type of thing. And then in 1974, all of that changed. That was during the oil embargo with the lines of all the cars. And I had a roommate that was in graduate physics. And he asked me, "Did you see this?" He had that book by Meisner, Thorne, and Wheeler, big book. And he says, in the last two chapters, it talked about zero point energy. And zero point energy, I've never heard this. And he says, yeah, this is what's in the fabric of completely empty space. And I said, I've never heard of this. And so I looked, it was John Wheeler's work. And so I found it in the library and I got really fascinated with it because I asked the question, can this be tapped as an energy source? And one thing led to another. Some professors were aghast, but the professors at the electrical engineering school never heard of it either. Right? And I was
Really,
really
in the 70s, they
surprised
still didn't know about it then.
they didn't hear of it. But yet I go over to the physics department, and they know all about it. And so I said, well, I got better start learning physics. And I started to take graduate physics at the time and befriended physics professors. And I could always get a mentor because I would make them a deal. I said, if you're my personal mentor, um, I'll do all your programming for free. Right. So
Nice.
I got like it was a win-win.
Yeah.
That was work because I would learn so much on this thing. Well, basically, one thing left to another. So in the '70s, I'm building up evidence. I said, where do we look for tapping the zero point energy? I got into quantum electrodynamics and realized, wow, there's anomalies in the plasma experiments, especially. And these anomalies were around the ion acoustic mode of the plasma. That means the heavy ions in the plasma are oscillating, and there would be excess energy events in that. And then the formation of vortices and vortex rings in the plasma. There was energetic anomalies associated with this, and it was in the standard literature. And so I wanted to write do this as my PhD thesis. And professors are aghast and everything else. I wrote the original paper to really propose it as my thesis was tapping the zero point energy, the very first paper of my very first book. And that paper launched me. There, thank you, Greg. That it would Eyring in Utah, Eyring Research Institute turned out to be interested. The paper got circulated by fax and Xerox. And I was proposing that it was part of systems engineering where I was getting my PhD because something happened 1977 that allowed me to build the case in standard science. Prior to that, the physics professors that really knew about zero point energy said, well, that's just random fluctuations, pretty well treated as noise. It's not significant in the background, except that it was in the vacuum polarization, both experiments and and theory that there can be interactions, especially around the heavy particles, where the steep lines of polarization would converge on the nucleus. And so that kind of was the key to the what do you do to activate the energy? The what allowed it to exist in systems engineering was the Nobel Prize work of Ilya Prigogine, who showed how systems can evolve from chaos to self-organization. And this met the critical objection that the zero point energy is treated just like noise, and therefore no coherence could happen. And if that's the way it is, right, that of course that conclusion is correct. But the models in the physics literature were not necessarily that way at all. And so I was looking for the experiments, and then I learned of the free energy community, hearing about, oh, inventors stumbling across it. And so perhaps the key big event for my life was the synchronicity of my name. I believe it was in 1976. I learned of an inventor called T. Henry Moray that happened to be in Utah. Greg, you could show him the book.
Oh, yeah.
I was destined to
I,
write this book.
this one right here.
Because the inventor's last name was identical to my first name, spelled identically.
Interesting.
And
Wow.
so that really hit me between the eyes with the 2x4, where I said, wow, now you got my attention. Right. So
All right. Well,
I
now
was
you got to
just,
get our attention because you got to let us know exactly what zero point energy is. Is there a
Yeah.
difference between that and vacuum energy? Let's kind of go back to so that everyone knows what we're talking about here.
well, I guess I could bring up some pictures so it'd help.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just
Uh,
in a quick sentence. I mean, do you know? I mean, is there a difference between zero point energy and vacuum energy,
it's
or are
all
they
under the
the same
same
thing?
name, zero
Got
point
it.
energy.
Okay.
It's what comprises the fabric of completely empty space. So it used to be
Okay.
called an ether. And so it was a hydrodynamic model. Classical electromagnetism was based on it. It's Maxwell's equations and that sort of a thing. In it evolved. So it's very interesting. So first we have an ether that was around for a few hundred years in
Mm-hmm.
science, and perhaps even further back on just philosophy and things like that. There's something in the fabric of space, certainly to support the propagation of light. In So 1905, special relativity was accepted by the scientific community. And it was much easier to do calculations by just saying there is no ether at all in
In special relativity or in general?
in
Okay.
special relativity. So this was the but you had the scientific community had to accept the existence of a rubbery space time. It used to be Newton's laws were perfect. Linear progression of time, three dimension of space. I would say that classical physics at that era was the golden age of science, where they really thought they had the theory of everything. And
Okay.
they said there was only two flaws in it, but I'll get to that in just a moment. But they were willing in 1905 to throw out the ether at the time relativity was accepted.
Okay.
But it didn't last very long. 25 years later, we have quantum mechanics and quantum electrodynamics being accepted in 1930. And this is where the background, what comprised the fabric of space, was dynamic fluctuations of high energy, like microscopic lightning, except at a very tiny scale. The Planck length is the scale, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. It was energetic. It was more modeled as a turbulent plasma than it was of fluid dynamics, which even offered greater opportunities for self-organization and energetic activities, including, this is what they stress, pair productions, electron-positron pairs just spontaneously exist come to life in the fabric of space, that come to appearance and disappearance. That's a tremendous self-organization where that actually happens, and what's happening in experiments when you do energetic experiments. They see tons of pair production from the vacuum. So there's a critical self-organization, and that was the key to tapping it, because the vacuum itself could spontaneously self-organize, and you could induce it with nuclei, and that's what was T. Henry Moray discovered. He was making plasma tubes, and he said the key for his plasma tubes to make the energy device was to oscillate the ions, the heavy particles. And darn if that didn't match the literature on quantum electrodynamics, where the interaction with the vacuum is very powerful when you work with the ions, especially when you work with lots of them. So the theme of my work, really, I credit T. Henry Moray with the critical concept, working with the heavy particles. And so I either oscillation groups of ions, creating vortices of ions, creating vortex rings of ions. And in fact, you didn't really need to have to do the nuclei of the plasma itself. Any charge motion, dust, anything that would start up in the vortex, as long as it was charged, you would start to get this self-organizational effect and excess energy anomalies appearing. So it's one heck of a paradigm change to say it could be that easy, that you just work with the heavy particles. And that was the key. Go ahead.
Well, I just, for those that don't know anything about, a 0-point energy or all this stuff, if it's completely new to them, then
we gotta get some terms defined here. I gotta list them.
we gotta slow down a little bit.
I represent the super layman.
That's super. So I just want to get your definition of 0-point energy, and then I also want to talk about what does that mean. In other words, you haven't talked about like the Tesla Society, Tesla Tech, and some of the other things. What are people trying to do with this information?
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in, is what has come about from it, because there's a lot.
So if we could go there first and then delve into
definitions first. We got to get everyone on the same page. We got to understand what 0-point energy is. You said you had some pictures that would help clarify?
Sure.
Let's do some slides then. Yeah.
Okay.
Or slow things down.
John, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, don't feel
intimidated.
Don't feel intimidated because you don't know.
It's like a double Dutch. And I'm gonna trip all over myself.
Yeah, no.
But ask a question. Just say, all right, what is pair production?
Ask
the question.
I'm a PowerPoint guy, so this is good.
All right.
Well, that's great. Well, if you're experiencing what I experienced, right? I learned that it exists in '74. Never heard of it. The quantum vacuum. What's in the vacuum? We heard of the ether, things like that. What's in it? That was the big question. Back in the 1800s, it gave rise to an ether. It was treated like a hydrodynamic model with vortices and things like that for the magnetic fields, the electric fields. And then the famous Michelson and Morley experiment came along, and they said, "Well, I don't see the fringe shifts in anything else from these experiments." But Michelson's experiments continued with Dayton Miller, and he did it up on Mount Palomar. And he says, "Wow, I can start to detect it." He made an interferometer 10 times more sensitive. He worked with Michelson, and he was giving. They were seeing a detection of an ether model as if the Earth is dragging it with it, like a boundary layer model that happens in normal hydrodynamics. So they're getting evidence of it. It's just when you're at sea level, they got the same results as Michelson at sea level, not much, because it was stationary relative to the Earth. As soon as they increased in elevation, they were starting to see evidence of the ether drift and the ether wind, and these types of things were occurring.
So these experiments are designed to find and discover some tangible evidence that there is some fabric to space.
Right.
That's what these
as a original modeling of just hydrodynamics, and they're seeing some evidence that even that old model seems to have aspects to it. Okay. And then but Einstein it looked like our physics was really perfect in classical physics. They called except for two unexplained things. The black body radiation
Yes,
spectrum
Yeah.
wasn't quite right, and atomic stability. According to classical physics, atoms should be unstable as the electron spirals around. It should radiate all its energy away. And therefore, according to our best theory of physics at the time, they concluded nothing exists. So, so, so they called them two small
Time
clouds.
to go home.
This is all an
So
illusion.
sorry, all of you are violating the laws of physics. I'm sorry.
I violate as many laws as I can in a day.
Sorry for violating.
Yeah. So
Kinda- kinda my thing.
It ushered in the era of quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
And there was various interpretations of quantum mechanics. And so this is one of my favorite cartoons. Can you see it okay? Or I need to blow it up.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Blow it up like that. There we go.
Be a quantum.
So this gave rise to the uncertainty principle, the concept of energetic vacuum, and paraproduction. Paraproduction means electron-positron pairs spontaneously organize and pop out of the vacuum and then disappear.
So annihilation because of opposite polarity, but equal in every other
Yeah.
regards. Okay.
So that type of thing. And so this started to launch, but notice that we have a 25-year history where the vacuum by the scientific community was considered completely empty. From 1905, when relativity came along, the Michelson and Moray experiment, till 1930, where quantum mechanics put this energetic vacuum back in, far more dynamic. And it would give rise to what Wheeler called the quantum foam. And its electrical flux enters into our three-dimensional space and immediately exits in this turbulence. So imagine these tiny, tiny holes where electric flux, that's electric field energy, enters and then immediately leaves in this turbulence. So we have an extremely active underpinning to what they call the zero-point energy or the vacuum energy. By the way, the word zero point came, which referred to what happens in completely empty space at absolute 0 degrees Kelvin, where there's not supposed to be anything there, no heat, no light, nothing, no matter what is left, what is the fabric of space. And then it was the zero-point energy or the vacuum energy. It's this more fundamental thing to all of creation. And
did they actually detect? Did they actually take experiments and bring it to absolute value and then detect that there was energy?
You can never get that low.
So is it mathematically that they actually kind of reduced it down and bring out the all of the temperature and bring down all the parameters with it? How did they get that? Okay.
Yes, they see in experiments, no matter what they do, this energetic activity, and that's why the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, no matter what, it always exists. All systems are interacting with it. You can never make it go away. Where does it come from? And this is where Wheeler, it comes from a higher dimensional space. So the physicists are really, really good at understanding higher dimensions. They work with it all the time in their modeling and things like that. The engineers struggle with it. They think we only have the 3 dimensions of space. Not to understand it, you have to pretend to intuitively understand it. You're a flatlander. Let's say pretend you're stuck on a plane and you can only look out across like a table surface, and that's known as the flatland slot, where you only see in 2 dimensions. You have no awareness of up or down. You can only look out across the plane. And then in the model, the energy comes through at right angles to the plane, like a rainstorm, always happening. So it enters and leaves, and when this would be on the left, the incoherent vacuum fluctuations, the quantum foam, it's just turbulence. If there's a slight tilt to it, we'll call it a polarized vacuum, and then a little bit lines in our flatland slot that's somewhat coherent. And then there's speculation, well, if there's vortex action in it, it gives rise to the elementary particles, and their existence is due to the feed of the vacuum energy. So it's like the flow of the river is like the vacuum energy, and the whirlpool is the manifestation of the particle that we see, and we typically can't see macroscopically the actual flow that's feeding it itself because it's coming from a higher dimension. So this is the orthogonal flux theory of the zero-point energy. It's what Wheeler proposed. It's too difficult to do any real calculations in its crude form. It was not popular because you really couldn't do much with it as far as calculation is concerned. How do you predict when self-organization occurs and when the electron-positron occurs? There's no fundamental first principles at all that would predict further physics on this model, and yet we see the evidence that this is happening. And tremendous energy densities are available, and that's because it's constantly fed from a higher dimension. So you can tap into that. And so Wheeler calculated...
A question, if I may. How do we know, or why do we suspect it's coming from a higher dimension, and what is a higher dimension?
Okay, so you have to reason by analogy.
Mm-hmm.
By pretending you're a flatlander, you are being confined to a simple plane like a tabletop.
Mm-hmm.
And the engineers had trouble with this too. But I read Flatland when I was in junior high school. It was
this is a book
written by a mathematical, little fictional
Not familiar
book.
with it.
Over 100 years old.
Yeah, okay. But it was a math guy who was teaching higher dimensions, and the physics people could easily entertain the idea.
Can we stay?
And I can see how.
Yeah, go ahead.
I could see how engineers struggle with this because it's a way above. For an engineer, it is or it isn't within the realm of what they have, and this is way above that. So. It's kind of a moot
you
point
could end up doing experiments, but you're going to be astounded. Where'd the energy come from? You have conservation of energy, right?
Yeah,
so
and they don't. I don't think
it's
they even
considered
think
impossible. And so I asked the question. Wheeler answered it. He asked the question, and he just calculated. He called it already unified field theory. And he says it comes from a higher dimensional space.
And what year was this again? His theory?
Yes, he wrote Wheeler was early 60s. The book
60s.
came out, Geometry of Dynamics. And this was my original introduction. I went right out and got Wheeler's book because the gravitation book, the last 2 chapters reference geometry of dynamics, and he was one of the authors. So I went right out and got his book. And so that means he was doing his research and his writing probably the late 50s, where he was working on the idea, and he published his book, Geometry Dynamics. So there it was in our library. I said, wow, boy, are the engineers going to be surprised about this.
A lot of questions lining up, I think.
Well,
go ahead,
ask
John.
them.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
The timeline of the theories, right? You mentioned go back 200 years and they kind of evolved from there, and then people pick it up like in the 1950s. Where's it at now, and just the general timeline of this?
Oh, well, the theories of the vacuum are essentially this quantum foam.
Yeah, that's pretty much accepted science now.
Yeah,
exactly.
But
it's a real quick synopsis of the timeline.
Right. So what happens?
Greg's shaking his head. All right, we gotta go to Greg then. Greg's not a good. All right, I don't know any scientist that doesn't believe or agree in 0-point energy.
They don't leave it that way. They say that's too hard to calculate, do calculations. So string theory evolved, where they make certain assumptions, and now they can start doing calculations. So they don't just leave this messy turbulence as the foundation, which to me is okay. That's where it started with Wheeler, but because you can't do calculations in it and predict self-organization, there's no linear theory. It's not calculable. It's too complicated. They preferred to simplify and come up with other models, and string theory became the popular model. And brain theory, right on its heels. And there, right away, brain theory means parallel universes with these flatland membranes, and they use the flatland analogy. That's why they call it a membrane, but they're really meaning parallel universes. And so these ideas are readily kicked around, and now, they have something that you at least do calculations with on these models. You can't have things going to infinity like these quantum foam things, and you get your wormholes out of this. Wheeler was the one to calculate it, the wormhole, these channels beyond space, beyond space, are 3 dimensions of space that are going into a higher dimension of space. And so it's an interesting disconnect between laymen and the engineers are in the same camp, that more dimensions can exist. Right, engineers are really stuck in classical physics. Right, they can't really get into the complexity of these models.
Well, Greg, you're an engineer. Do you agree with him on that?
Yeah, let's hear from you, Greg.
Well,
I have a question after. I have a question after Greg.
All right, go ahead. But I want to hear Greg's take on this.
Obviously, this isn't about me, and I want to focus on
I know. But you shook your head, so you
I have to say that not all physicists agree that the universe is multidimensional, and not all engineers believe it's 3-dimensional. It's not quite that black and white. So that's okay. The first, I would say. And the other thing is, I just want to point out that in this world of independent science, which David Hilster was one, and of course Moray is one as well, there's a huge diversity of opinions. Some people go with mainstream on one thing, and then they are vehemently oppose the mainstream on something else. And so there's as much a variety of opinion in the world of independent science as there is between independent scientists and the mainstream. So that's
which is why science is great, because you can have
and the third point I want to make,
or you have theories.
Okay.
I just want to point out that Moray briefly, I'd like to make a distinction between what 0-point energy is versus how we get it. Now, he spent just a little bit of time talking about what 0-point energy is, and I want to re-emphasize that. And that is that if you were to take away all the temperature and all the heat and all the light, and say what's left, what's holding all this stuff together, what is causing matter to be what it is, that I think we all agree that that's what 0-point energy is. There's an energy that's involved that is beyond mere temperature or interaction and mere radiating around and all that kind of stuff. That's what the 0-point energy is. So how we get it, now that's, in my opinion, subject to a lot of debate. And I have a huge amount of respect for I call you Dr. King, and you didn't finish that story, but but anyway, I just want to make that point, that I think they're not, that how we get it is still very much up in the air.
All right, just so I'm on the same page with all of you. So we, scientists and engineers at this point, are all in agreement that this thing exists, and some people call it quantum foam, some people call it ether, some people call it 0-point energy. Am I correct that they all agree something there is there? Because they are detecting. I mean, engineers do need to account for it when they're dealing with the small microchips and that. I mean, there is interference at those levels.
They have that in quantum mechanics, but I think where the dispute would be, well, can you get a net energy out?
That's what I'm most interested in.
Yeah, right. and then there's, well, we have conservation of energy, but then you have the uncertainty principle. What's jittering it around? Where did it come from? And I've heard answers like, that's an improper question, right? Why?
Improper.
That is the question.
That is the question, because you have a manifestation of energy from nowhere. So just ask the question, where's it come from? That's all Wheeler did. He calculated. He says, well, it comes from a higher dimension.
All right. Then I have a really quick
go ahead.
question. Would you say, and this seems out there, with all the latest footage, available from the Pentagon, with all these orbs and imagings of
just say
alleged
UFOs.
How can you say it's scientific?
But
we're not scientists here. We're playing a podcasting right now.
So the movement, they say that, well, that's impossible. Is this more interest, stimulate more interest in this? Actually, it is. Whatever beings that did this harvest this kind of energy to make it move that way. It's just so far beyond us that we can't even. But they have video proof of these weird things doing things that essentially defy logic. Would this explain that? Possibly.
Of course, because now we have the energy we need to warp space-time. It's like a warp drive. that they're doing warping space-time, and they're just falling with it. That's why they don't feel the inertial stress when they do like a hairpin turn.
Yes.
Right, because
They're
it's
not expelling mass. That's why.
it's a warp drive that's going on. So, and the big surprise to say, oh, it's in our future. Well, the biggest surprise I think comes out of Stephen Greer's work, the latest documentary, the lost century and how to reclaim it, and it was about UFOs, about free energy inventions, and about suppression. And the reason we lost the century because it was suppression. And the big surprise, Greer has no trouble saying, not only are the UFOs there from other intelligences, but we can do it too. It's part of our top secret projects, and we're able to do it. Therefore, it's not that hard to do, right? You have to make the fundamental discoveries to do it, and all of a sudden there's an explanation for the suppression. They want it for them, not for us, etc. And so it gets into some interesting rabbit holes.
And I'm going to bring up a depressing rabbit hole just from the beginning here. What is the point for engineers and hobbyists and researchers to even dabble in this when the moment they do find success, they're going to be shut down?
Yeah,
where's the motivation? This is the real issue. It's completely that fear, and it's a real fear. As you get into some of, I hopefully we could talk some of the hydrogen and water experiments out there. I think I really like your interest in that. I've seen, as you guys have too, many people driving, or a handful of people at a time, driving vehicles running on water. All right, you're not going to see that on the market. It will be shut down as soon as somebody starts going on videos and broadcasting it. All of a sudden, their videos are down. What is the motivation? I mean, it's a depressing rabbit hole because you can't accomplish success if you do.
Well, that was the point of Stephen's documentary. He says, okay, suppression exists. So knowing that for a while, what if we team up and share the experiment, open source?
That's the only way.
And so therefore, no matter who they suppress, others are doing it. And I agree. I think that has to be the solution, because in standard science, it's a repeating experiment that makes the difference. It can't be one person's claim or another person's claim. It's not truly reality for scientists, and especially engineers. They need an engineerable system that must replicate. Otherwise, we don't have anything we can count on. So this offers a whole new energy source to humanity. In order to punch it through, it's a more complicated problem than the simple, just make the invention and we'll market it, because of the suppression. Right. There are those that do not want it, and instead they have their agenda controlling the world, or whatever their agenda is.
Might there be some good reasoning behind suppressing it? I mean, the world does kind of evolve.
I think so. Yeah. I could see good reasons. I mean,
it's all about money, isn't it?
It's money. Oh, you'll disrupt the economy. What if we get too much energy too fast? Or can we make new weapons from it? Is mankind ready to receive it? I like, is it giving matches to a baby? And so I would say these are good reasons, because at least they're saying you're not mature enough to handle this.
Some of the world leaders aren't mature enough either. I mean, there are some countries that we have zero influence over, and not that we should, but if they got upset, we couldn't calm them down. Let's put it that way. And if they had the technology, if it was out there and readily available,
first have to figure out how to tax the energy before anything can be moved forward.
That's kind of true.
Just like with solar panels, they're already doing more. You get a
or put a meter on it, which is the whole story of Nikola Tesla's suppression.
I remember.
I recall there were science fiction short stories on that very theme, right? The guy discovers it, uses all this energy, and then the aliens show up and give him a bill. Here's your electric bill, right? So the themes, everything, all the themes have been visited by science fiction, of course.
Yeah.
So there's a whole gamut, and other optimistic outcomes. I think Stephen Greer is pushing them. That's why I really enjoy his efforts. Is that it could precipitate formal contact. They say, congratulations, humans, you cracked the code. You're welcome to the club. You get to join the Federation. But there's rules to the game. No galloping around the universe playing space cowboy and shooting things up.
Maybe they're
they
already
say,
doing that.
by the way, this is 10,000 years ago technology, and we could wipe you out like this. So slow your roll.
Well, as far as first contact, perhaps we already have made first contact, and they are kind of the aliens probably talking with the military, saying, "So, you guys ready for this technology?" And they're looking down at the world, going, "Maybe we just keep it secret for a while." If I were in the military, I probably would choose that. If I had that UFO or a working craft where I could actually zip across the universe or the galaxy and met some other civilization, I'd probably come back and keep my mouth quiet.
And who's to say
I
you're
probably
not
would.
their who's to say
you
you're
wouldn't have
not
a
their
choice.
ambassador currently?
I always have a choice to say what I want to say.
Well, that's an interesting statement too. There's effort worldwide to try to silence freedom of speech.
Yes,
U.S.
it
is
is.
I'm saying military, you're required, to keep your mouth shut in the military for certain things.
There's a lot of military came out though. And Stephen Greer was going, kind
Stuff
of
does come out.
going public. They were at the end of their life. They're going, no, people need to know that this is bigger than military secret.
So I think the end result, to me, is an optimistic result. Human race gets invited to join the Federation, which means the current government's trying to control the world don't have the power anymore. We join up. We get fast forwarded right into like a Star Trek scenarios. Well, by the way, there was a great Star Trek on this very topic called First Contact on this very issue. I think.
Was that the movie?
The
film or the TV show?
Or one of the episodes. I think
it was one of the, yeah, okay, sorry, because I remember there was a scientist.
Picard, episode of Picard, and the story goes they have a rule in the Federation. Okay, when a society finally stumbles on warp drive, we make contact because it's too dangerous or too upsetting to them. And then we invite them to join the Federation, and they portrayed it out perfectly in this episode of it was a good science fiction episode because it really hit the nail on the head. And so these are what I consider the optimistic outcomes. We really can solve our problems on Earth. We could get a free ride into solving major problems that are beyond our science, things like that, like radioactive waste remediation. That's beyond our science right now, but not beyond maybe advanced civilizations to help us take care of the problem. And so it's really hard to say. I really like Stephen Greer's initiative, and I was invited to join the documentary last year, so I got a small cameo.
Nice.
In it, but it was hitting the nail on the head, right? It's suppression. We already have made the discovery. It's nothing new. It's all about control. It's all about the economy. Well, if the way things are going, looks like they're trying to collapse the economy anyway. So they reach a point where everything is pretty much solvable if you have an unlimited energy budget. You have technologies to solve most of our problems, which, as you think about it, all our problems are due to a lack of energy. We just don't have access to it. We could solve our physical problems, in a sense, make utopia on Earth. But you need a mature human race to receive it. We can't just use it as a weapon of war.
Well,
right?
I think there's also another issue. I mean, most of the things that should be free in this world, we pay most of our money for. Food, water, housing, all of these things should be free in the first place. I could go down the woods, chop down some trees, build my house, and hunt and fish. But you can't do that. So you're prevented from... So there is something more fundamental about humanity right now that makes us pay for everything, even things that are God-given to this world. So if we had free energy, it wouldn't be free for long. But all right, so I digress.
Yeah, but you need a technology.
But there's something wrong with people.
So you have to pay for the piece of equipment.
Yeah,
right? Somebody has to build
humans
it.
are inherently, they are who they are. So somebody will find a way to manipulate it to make money. It'll be siphoned to elites or whatever. It always has, always throughout time. So there's nothing different with this.
So I also noticed there's a consciousness movement going on in parallel with all this, where people are starting to really become aware and things like that. And they said humanity is really part of a group mind. We are all participating together, and we should be connected better. We should realize that we're really are each other. And so Greg could hold up the book. I had to find out
Which one?
This is the water book.
Oh, okay.
Greg's your Vanna White.
There was an anomaly. See, so this book was 10 years in the making, because I kept researching it. And I said, this class of projects looks like they're really tapping into the 0-point energy, and not, it's just not a hydrogen combustion, right, that's moving the piston. You needed a little bit of that to make the plasma, so you needed that, but there's something more going on. And that something more was a ball lightning type event, microscopic ball lightning.
I lost you. What are we talking about? I think I know what you're talking about. I think you're talking about the electrolyte. No one at all knows what this is. I've talked with friends and family. You got to explain. We're talking about water.
Right.
Okay, you didn't say it. Go, please, John.
Water.
He's talking about running cars on water.
The top our news here at 6 o'clock, an age-old dream becoming a reality. A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
It's a major breakthrough that will no doubt make motorists happy. And as Ralph Robinson explains, the Pentagon is also showing lots of interest in this project.
Water has always been considered a precious commodity, but Stan Meyer's invention may make it even more valuable. He has developed what's called a water fuel cell. It has taken the place of his old gas tank. The water fuel cell breaks down water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen. The hydrogen is used to run his dune buggy.
I don't care if you use rainwater, well water, city water, ocean water. If you don't have any fresh water, go ahead and use snow. If you don't have any snow available to you, they use salt water because there's no adverse effect to the fuel cell.
Meyer started working on this project 4 years ago. He's not a scientist. He isn't even a chemist. In fact, he never graduated from college. Myers was determined, he says, to design something to protect this country from oil embargoes.
Not only water, but we're not running it on the water. Water was
do
a
with the water,
means
yes.
to get to the 0-point energy.
All right, please explain that.
Yeah, I guess we're back to the slides.
Well, yeah, we have to explain, because otherwise, if you talk about these, so I've made one of these, so I've kind of went through the process. I just didn't install. I couldn't get anyone to install it in their vehicle.
And not all of them. Most of them will make just hydrogen, and that's not sufficient. Right?
This is just
something you have to make something else in the water. There's something else going on besides making hydrogen.
All right, let's see the technology. I'm interested in that.
Okay, while he's looking for that, is there an example of somebody who did it?
Oh yeah, many. We've three of us have met.
That's been backed up scientifically.
Meyer's invention was introduced in Britain earlier this month, and now the Brits have followed him here.
We recently took a scientific delegation to witness Stan's work, to really evaluate it, and came back saying, this is one of the most important inventions of the century.
You can see them. They have their.
Did this, and then it's like
you can see them do it.
You can see them doing
it.
You can meet them. You go to the Tesla Tech. You go to any of these conferences. There's semi-truck drivers who have multiple trucks. They can't afford the gas, so they retrofit them with these devices.
And what's the emission on that? 0? If it is, why aren't we pursuing
it emits water.
There's a
water vapor.
Huge infrastructure in place.
You're asking the question we were talking about 15 minutes ago.
Exactly.
It's not so easy.
No, it's impossible right now. It's impossible to get
better
this
than. Okay.
let's see the technology.
It'd be great if we all just got our dreams, but it's not. It's just not that easy. There's a lot of forces we're fighting against.
Yeah, and a lot of people wind up dead when they try to fight it too.
Yeah.
Some scientists.
Basically, I will say a vortex ring of plasma called a plasmoid is the key connector of tapping into the vacuum energy.
Can I just jump in and say a vortex is like a whirlpool?
Thank you, Greg.
For those that don't know.
Well, and then if it's charged, all the better. You get some interesting anomalous effects. And some electrolyzers, not all, were inadvertently making lots of these ball lightning events in the combustion chamber itself. So the hydrogen ignition help make a plasma, and that plasma would convert charged water droplets that were very strong into vortex rings. And so basically, conduction band electrons are modeled as smeared charge clouds. They're essentially in thermodynamic equilibrium with the 0-point energy. That's why normal circuits and things like that, everyday circuits, don't really exhibit excess energy. But if you work with the nuclei, they have steep lines of vacuum polarization, and these particles now start to exhibit excess energy if you start to jerk them around, move them around, make vortexes up of them. And so that was the key. That principle kept repeating and repeating and repeating for a wide class of inventions and observations in plasma physics where they're observing excess energy events and you don't know where it's coming from. But here's the flat land view of it. Okay, if the ions jerk or abruptly move, that little flux normally would come through at right angles. A little bit of it gets bent into our three-dimensional space, and now we're exhibiting excess energy. And sure enough, the ion acoustic mode of the plasma, gets us right back to T. Henry Moray. So this launched the explanation of what's going on in his device. He may oscillate the ions in synchronization. And so,
you refer to his device. Do we have an example of this device?
Not now, but at the time he made it. In fact, this presentation.
Is there any video on it? If it happened,
we're looking
in
for the
60s or 70s.
We're talking.
Well, Moray's device was in the 20s. And we have still pictures. In fact, we're going to jump over to it. There's an example of it. Greg can show.
Has anybody remade this
your
device?
picture's as good as anything in the book.
Yeah, in fact, this presentation, here's the original book by Moray and rewritten by John, his son, and it was based on essentially ionization. And do we have a repeat inventor? Here's another picture. Here's some more pictures.
Just to be clear, he's lighting up that bank of light bulbs with this energy source that he created.
Yeah, with the plasma tubes that he made. Yeah. There's another picture. It caused my book to come into existence because I was destined to write this book. The inventor's last name matches my first name. And my book talks about the plasma tubes. It was actually in a patent, but we're not going to. You ask who's repeating it. And it turned out Paul Brown was working with the same. He was a popular speaker at the Tesla conferences and the other energy conferences, I think, back in the 80s and 90s. And he was killed. Actually, his car was sabotaged. And so he died in 2002. Boy, he warned about suppression. There was another device that he replicated, but it was basically the same idea as working with the plasma. And what he did, there was Hubbard. This is another interesting phenomena. Hubbard himself was the inventor that he was trying to replicate because this was a simpler device. Here's another picture of it. But Hubbard had a hell of a story. I mean, this is a kid, a teenager, right? I think 16 or 17, claims this was a revelation. It was given to him by angels. I mean, he had a heck of a story. He wasn't that scientific at all. All of a sudden, he comes up with this device, and the time frame is about 1919, that time, just before 1920, and T. Henry Moray gets famous in the 20s. So this was the other device. And this is before any suppressions, like one of the more famous devices. And the reason Hubbard got on the map is because he contacted a professor, I think it was up in Seattle, maybe it was UW, University of Washington, that got all excited and made press at the time that this exists. And basically it was working kind of on the same principles that T. Henry Moray worked. So Moray had to make his plasma, and he used radioactive material to make the plasma. It's illegal to get it, but he was working with salts of radium, Moray was, and Hubbard was doing likewise. He makes the plasma, and then once you have the plasma, you can start to oscillate the ions and make the ion motion. And so Hubbard had one patent using a radium tip spark plug to predate the patent. So you could say perhaps Hubbard was the very first. He predated Moray, but it was approximately the same time frame. He got a lot of publicity and a simpler device. And Paul Brown patented the device, and he explained the device in the basically he made plasma and get the ion stars. Like that was the same principle. And Paul Brown made it very clear in his patent how well he was doing. I'm just going to flash these slides. We need a little bigger. Here we go. So this was experimental. This is the repeat of perhaps one of the original ones, and we're not going to go into detail on the details. Other than is working with radioactive material. And here's the actual picture of what Paul Brown built. And I said, I talked to Paul. He says, how many people are smart enough? You're using very weak radium. And he hit it. He didn't call it a zero-point energy device. He says, oh, I'm just making a resonant nuclear battery. I'm just tapping nuclear material. And but I said, your material's way too weak, right? And how many people realized that? They're trying to make a 5-watt device, and he wanted to make this really harmless sounding, and no claims of zero-point energy, no claims of excess energy. But I picked up on it right away. I said that material is too weak, and here I won't go into the calculation. That so if you got 100% of that converted mass to energy in that weak radium material, your device could not produce any more than a milliwatt.
So Moray, do you think the radium acted more as a catalyst, or rather than being the thing itself? In other words, it caused other reactions. You needed it for that purpose, but it wasn't
radioactive. It's more active.
It ionized, the environment, the air, whatever, to make plasma. So you didn't have to put any energy in yourself to make the plasma.
Then where was the energy actually coming from, in your view?
The zero-point energy from the ion oscillation.
From the vacuum of space.
Basically, he repeated what T. Henry Moray discovered in a much simpler way. This is Paul Brown. He's also the first to ever replicate a historic inventor on this. And he wanted to go to market with this 5-watt nuclear battery and explain it as nuclear energy. And I asked him, I've shared a cab ride back from the conference when he presented this. This is in the 90s, late 90s. I said, how many people are smart enough to even call you on this that are engineers? And he said, well, maybe if I'm in a layman audience, maybe 1 in 100. If I'm talking to engineers, maybe 1 in 10 are smart enough to know enough about nuclear science to realize that what I'm claiming is way out of bounds. It can't be done. He says, but that's the short answer. The long answer was this. I was actually trying to do better than that. We were trying to make, I think, a 100-watt device with this, approximately 100 watt. It was unstable. We would have surges of energy, sometimes up in the kilowatts, that would burn everything out, burn it all up. So he was really stumbled onto a big effect. And he says, well, we can't, because it's unstable, we can stabilize it under 10 watts. And so that was their goal. And they would advertise, okay, this lasts a real long time. We're going to sell a 5-watt nuclear battery and duck below the radar, saying, oh, this is no magical thing. Everybody understands. Oh, yeah, you can bluff it as nuclear energy as your real source. And that was the goal. Their company intended to make money selling 5-watt nuclear batteries that would last for many, many years, right? Good for satellites, good for buoys. They had a market for it. You actually had to be licensed to even buy it because radium, they're pretty draconian on it, on doing it.
Moray, can I just throw in, just tell me if you think I'm explaining it maybe with the analogy you would use, but I like to use the analogy of a light switch. When you flip a light on, there's, I mean, you know, it's instant as far as we can see, but the reality is it takes a little time for all the components in the system in the circuit to readjust. And that's the point at which it's out of equilibrium. It's far from equilibrium, and that's, so if we could somehow be flipping the switch on and off all the time, you know, in this, as you say, an abrupt way, that's how we could create these huge peaks, these huge sparks that he was seeing. Would you describe it that way, or?
In fact, what you described is the best devices to build safe devices, and you never build up too much energy. His problem was he was resonant and building up too much energy, and the device burned itself out. You couldn't get it stable. The pulsing devices, and this is where we get to the HHO, the engines and all that, because you're on those devices, you're pulsing just for the downstroke of the piston, right? Just a little flash. And then we'll get to that in a moment as the easiest device. And then it extinguishes within a few milliseconds. And then you do it again and again. And then now you are very stable, and you're harvesting the energy. You're only harvesting a pulse worth of it at a time. It's enough to move the piston. It's enough to give you excess energy, but you're not having to wrestle with a resonant system that builds it up too much. And so you avoid. It's a very practical, easy to do engineering way of attacking the problem. And this gets back to what you're saying, Jeff. Oh, these HHO type devices seem to be generating excess energy, and they fall into that class. Easy to do. Don't build up too much. There are ways to get it reliable, which I'll talk about. In fact, they talk about it in the water book. Once I realized what is going on. And so I guess to summarize this section of the talk, here we have a repeat of just working with ion oscillations, repeat of the T. Henry Moray principle of using it in a much simpler experiment that Paul Brown was doing. And he got it stable under 10 watts for small amounts of powder. But look what happened to him. He didn't get under.
Yeah, I noticed on 105. Mother's car pipe bombed? Gee,
yeah, he fired off a letter warning everybody. Yeah, there's threats, suppression, everything else. And this is back in 91.
That's when it was some of the worst, actually.
Where was the pipe bomb incident?
That
what state?
I can't remember. I think he was Idaho at the time, I think, doing when he was working in a lab in Idaho. It was a hell of a story. Had to get licensing to work with the radium. It was difficult to do. Today you can't.
And no one found out that they didn't investigate, or they investigated and never found out the culprit of the pipe bomb. My assumption.
These were events. I don't know. I don't know the details of these events. Paul was now warning about it. And so that was the worst. I don't think it killed his mother. I think they just blew up the car as a threat. So basically,
they carried out the threat.
Yes, there's lists out there of all the scientists. I mean, the people are making of all the scientists who worked on this sort of technology and the mystery surrounding their death. So
that would be another podcast if we collated all that.
There's people that have a good record of it. So
there's books on suppressed inventions, right?
Yeah,
and Stephen Greer's video right now is the #1 leader on what's going on as far as suppression and everything else, and etc. We talked about that earlier. So all those same ideas.
All right. So I wanted to quick say. I'm really interested. There's always a trend with you talked about it going infinity going to a point, and this has a lot to do with the mathematics that I'm interested in, and also the results that I've had when I was doing experimenting is with collapsing fields. So if I may, so you build up a field, and it has this energy stored, and you don't give the system the entire amount of energy, and you quick give another, and that disrupts the equilibrium. This is something that I found, and I've seen it with a lot of the experiments, and I've seen enough that I'm convinced it's real. But I would like to convince some other people that this is real. So I'd like to talk about the HHOs.
Okay. I may have to explain what is going on in these electrolyzers.
Yes.
And so I felt, and so we're going to see that they actually make a ball lightning event from a charged water particle. And this is kind of the thesis. I didn't really nail it until I think 2015, and it's the next to the last chapter of the water book. But everything came together when I realized what they're getting off those electrolyzers is charged nanobubbles that are very, very stable, surprisingly stable. And these form the core to allow a ball lightning event to occur when the plasma surrounds it. So what I was going to illustrate this ball lightning phenomena right now with a couple slides, if I may.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do the share. See it okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the ball lightning, this is actual picture from the Russian research. It's essentially a vortex ring of plasma that circulates like a slinky closing on itself. Can you imagine that? It's a circulation, and the ions are circulating as well in the vortex ring itself. So it's a spiral that closes on itself. Probably I'll give credit to Ken Shoulders, who's a researcher that really studied these microscopic forms of ball lightning, and he really perhaps is one person credited for the experimental foundation of the key mechanism to tap the 0-point energy. Whenever we make ball lightning, we can make it microscopically, and that's what he was studying there, on the order of a micron in size. And his work originally started with just a sharp-pointed electrode. That's all it was, onto an insulator, and then behind the insulator was a metal base. And he wrote a beautiful patent back in 1991. And some of the Russians got interested. Mesyats was the vice president of the Russian Academy of Science. He got very interested in Ken Shoulders' work, so he provided the explanation of what's happening. So imagine this. This is a blow up of the pointed cathode, sharp pointed cathode, and just before it fires off the ball lightning, there's a liquid metal that gets melted down to liquid metal, and a little protuberance comes up out into the surrounding area that's polarized, and then it snaps off. And the perfect symmetry of this blob of liquid metal and the snapping event creates the vortex ring circulation in that event, this very abrupt event, which ends up making the ball lightning form. And he would wear away the electrodes, so what he learned to do is use a liquid metal to surround the electrode point like a fountain pen. And this is the type of thing that Ken Shoulders was doing and experimenting with to make his observations. And then he found they can make it a very sharp event with this type of setup with a little passive wire stub to make. And he could make bigger ones if he cascaded them, but he didn't like making bigger ones because they were so powerful that the EMP event from them hitting a conductor and making a crater and put out so much EMP, it would wreck his electrical equipment, measuring equipment. So he rarely ever worked with them, the large ones himself. The Russians continued their work on the large ones, and he learned he could make a cascade of them. If he wanted to build up a big one, he could. He named them electrum validum. This is in this patent. It's Latin for strong charge. And they contain about 100, the charge of 100 billion electrons. They seem to drag along 1 million ions. The charge to mass ratio was always like the electron. This was a clue. And no matter what size he made these things, it was always that charge to mass ratio like the electron. And so that gives us a clue. And they contain excess energy. So he would make craters and realize way more energy that took to melt the material to make a crater than was on the original capacitor to make them. He would do a single capacitor discharge to launch one of them. And so he was able to make the measurements to prove we had excess energy on the microscopic scale. He even made positive ones. And this was highly significant because they were not collections of positrons at all. Likewise, their charge to mass ratio was like the positron. So he was getting to the essence of what's the nature of pair production from the vacuum. Why is there always pairs of electron positron type pairs from the vacuum? In fact, he even made pairs of these. Likewise, do a pair production. So he felt he was onto something very, very fundamental scientifically. Why does a vacuum like to organize into that charge to mass ratio, the same as the electron or the positron? So I felt too that you're onto something very significant. You're making something out of the vacuum with the help of this little blob and this vortex ring type phenomena. He found they could even go dark. He's on an insulator substrate, and just a small electrical pulse reactivates them to emit light. So he's very, very curious about that. And they could propel. They had the self-propulsion aspect to it. And this really excited Ken because he felt he was onto the essence of a UFO-type propulsion. And they could bring and drag along debris with them. They would typically spontaneously go up to the 10th of the speed of light, and basically it was like a warp drive. And so he felt that he was onto the essence of a UFO propulsion event from this. So we were actually cohering the vacuum energy to do this propulsion event, this warp drive type event. And he also said that he could make very powerful vortexes. If you started with a vortex of water, this is a very tiny scale. So because the ball lightning itself is on the order of a micron in size, so this is a very tiny vortex. If he shot one of these forms into that vortex, it would make a very, very powerful coherent vortex. So he knew that this was a way to build up the energy, is using vortex phenomena seeded by the original EV that he was shooting into it.
Moray, can I just interrupt and ask a question about that picture?
Yeah, I got lots of questions. Let's go off the slide share. And,
okay. Well, this picture, before we get off of it,
okay.
My question is that little EV, is that like a point particle that's taking that path, or does the object itself have like a wave duality to it or something like that?
Well, the EV itself was like the microscopic ball lightning, and it's a coherent vacuum energy form that's propelling, and when it gets into that water vortex, that tiny little water vortex, it makes that into coherent vacuum energy vortex form that makes an extremely powerful pulse coming out the other end. And his problem was he couldn't tap it. He says it damages anything it hits. He used the analogy like shooting a bullet at a windmill blade, right? It wouldn't propel it would just damage the blade. So he didn't know how to tap this in a practical way. He just observed this in his experiments. And so what we have is, this is the foundational essence of Ken Shelter's fundamental discovery of these microscopic ball lightning forms that have excess energy, and they have excess propulsion, which is the key to then explaining the water devices that we're going to see, because we end up making these entities out of these electrolyzer type water devices, and once you know that, you don't necessarily you know what to shoot for. I'm going to, in a minute, talk about the inventor who did that. But I'll stop sharing so we can talk. Should I stop sharing?
Yes,
please. Yeah.
Okay.
Try to keep the slides.
Yeah. So this ends the section on ball lightning. This was the critical key. I knew about this, and that's why I could suggest that this is what's coming from the electrolyzers themselves. this entity was being made in the combustion chamber.
All right,
And
so I have a lot of questions about the ball lightning. If we can go ahead, I didn't mean to interrupt, but they're. I don't want to go. Yeah,
go ahead. You
very
can ask the
important.
questions.
All right, good. So I've done a lot of experiments with ball lightning. There's 3 main different ones, and they're replications of other people's work. So the first is the old microwave ovens. They would have the waveguide shoot straight down to the bottom, and it would heat up the food. And those were really good if you take a tea candle and you raise the wick up. It'll actually produce, and you put like a glass, or no, you just kind of put that in the middle of, right underneath the center of the waveguide, and a ball lightning plasmoid would come off of the tip of the candle and bounce around inside the microwave. So it was at such a frequency so it couldn't escape out of the microwave oven, but it would bounce around. And sometimes you get 2 or 3, and they're about golf ball size. But yes, they definitely formed a toroid as they're going up, and then as they bounce, they change shape and everything. The second type, because they stopped making microwave ovens like that, and so I have a question with the end of this, is they started making the waveguide shoot at multiple angles so that it would heat evenly. So you have to do the first experiment, you have to get a really old style microwave. The second style, people found that you could take a little piece of aluminum foil, I did brass, and cut a circle, and then people would use a pencil lead, because graphite is conductive. I would use nails, anything I could to solder, and you could put it at a certain height to diameter ratio, and the tip alone would resonate with the base and send a plasmoid off the top. But the problem with this one, well, you put a vase over it. This is a really interesting question, but I'll come back to it. The third one is with just a regular lighter, with the type that you can take the top off. You can actually turn where you can adjust the flame, and if you get it really high, there's something that happens around the rim where a bunch of little smaller plasmoids would fall off, like a shower, like a fountain. They go, and they're tiny little balls, like the size of a bead. But it's the experiments I did most with the second type, which most fascinating, is if you take a vase, a round vase, like a fishbowl vase, and put it over that little disc with the nail sticking out of it, it would form a ball inside there, so it wouldn't go past the glass. And when you shut the microwave off, it would shut down, and the glass wasn't even warm, barely warm. But if you take a long cylindrical vase and you put it in, it would shoot toroids off the top, like little donuts going up along the vase, and then it would shatter because it was melting the glass. The heat, when it was in a toroid shape, it dispersed heat, and when it was in a spherical shape, it was confined. Have you heard anything about that with the heat dissipation? Because that was the big issue. Because you're talking about toroids moving. There's a lot of heat that goes along with that, at least that I found. Maybe not at a microscopic level, but have you heard anything about that with the shape?
Well, you can also make glow plasma in shape like a ball. Mm-hmm. Is it necessarily a vortex ring type of event that they're being made? At the extent that you have abrupt discharges and things are flying off, every single electric discharge has a ball lightning precursor on it, a microscopic ball lightning precursor on it. So to the extent that you induce that, when you do steady state, where I'm building up a standing wave in a chamber and I start to ionize the area, that may not be a vortex ring. I'm just creating an ion plasma form that's symmetrical, and it's kind of confined into the chamber due to the fact that you're making standing waves and that sort of thing to concentrate the energy there. So the ones of interest that are tapping into the 0 point energy are the ones that make the vortex forms, and typically they come off of an abrupt discharge event. Okay.
Not a steady flow of like the radiation, because I became convinced with experiments that this matter is actually being produced just from light. There's some resonance. Is there any... All right, what I'm saying, what I kind of get into is, you talk about things annihilating and things being produced out of the vacuum of space, and I'm wondering if it's just, it doesn't have mass, that these two light waves come and they resonate and they form this plasma which has mass. Is there anything in any of your research or any of your findings where you get mass plasma coming from ordinary light, like microwave or any kind of light? Have you
Well,
heard of any of this?
it's an energy source. So yeah, lasers especially, right?
You
They
get
can
plasmoids from
ionize.
lasers?
Well, they ionize the environment.
Okay.
Now, to get the plasmoid vortex rings, typically they happen on an abrupt event, where you have a abrupt ball of plasma being ejected.
That was my question, Moray. Is it true that all ball lightning, like 100% all ball lightning, arises from a non-equilibrium thing? You just wouldn't get a ball lightning unless you had that condition,
Well,
the
it
prigogine you
depends.
talked about earlier?
Yeah, it depends. Are we making a vortex ring of plasma type of thing, or are we just using energy to make a shape plasma that's just glowing as a ball shape? So there's a distinction. So when I'm talking about these forms, these EV forms that Ken Shoulders essentially discovered, these are the vortex rings forms that are from a very abrupt events, typically requiring a symmetrical particle in the middle of it, like the liquid blob of liquid metal, to be subjected in a symmetrical fashion to the abrupt discharge, which takes it right into the vortex ring form all at once. And you can't make a vortex close on itself. The tip will never join the top. The ring itself has to be made all at once, and it requires a strong symmetrical particle for the discharge to surround, to convert that into the vortex ring itself, all in one abrupt action. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that's what I was finding too. At the tip of the nail, it would form a ball. So it seems like there was something melting at the tip that initiated that toroid or the plasma. So all right, so you got this heat. The microwaves are hitting it, the plate, and resonating off of that enough to melt the tip only. And then you're saying at that moment when that becomes liquefied, that's when the plasma starts. Is that
Right. In
kind
fact,
of along the
yeah, that idea, and then you could, okay, now I have my liquid metal, and then I can add a sharp pulse event to that to launch it into the launched ball EV form or ball lightning form.
Okay.
By the way, EV was Ken Shoulders' first name. He eventually called them EVOs, exotic vacuum objects. When he became convinced, indeed, they are tapping into the zero point energy, and they definitely contain excess energy. And those are the ones that self-propel. They're the ones that start to take off like a warp drive up to 1/10 of the speed of light. And those are the ones that can propel a piston.
I'd like to just throw in, oh, sorry. You're done.
Go ahead.
Well, I just like to throw in regarding ball lightning. It just brings to mind there are a number of videos that you can watch on YouTube and so on that show you how to make ball lightning. Like Bill Beatty does one out of a microwave, and you asked the question earlier, can you do it just with regular old light? And that's pretty much what it is. It's a microwave radiation, and through using just that simple microwave source, he's able to generate ball lightning.
Well, that's what I was saying I was doing, but the question is it actually coming from the wet light waves, or is it actually melting the tip and creating plasma out of the mass of the tip?
I see.
That's the question. I'm wondering if it's actually being created.
You want the liquid metal.
All right, the liquid's critical then, I see.
Yeah, to be the blob. You want an abrupt discharge event as well, to blow off the tip and get it to form into the vortex ring form. So just because you see a ball of plasma, right, that you make with whatever energy source, doesn't necessarily mean it's a vortex ring. So there's an important distinction there.
So how would you know? I mean, it looked like a donut, a bluish, fiery donut. Is that a vortex ring, or you don't know still?
Well, maybe it may or may not be, but one of the keys is after you launch it, typically an abrupt discharge event, it persists on its own. You don't need to keep giving power. Like you might use the microwave to energize the area and energize and focus it to where you want. But if you do the abrupt event, then you can extinguish. You don't need your power anymore. The ball lightning will persist on its own, just like it does in nature when people observe it. it persists on its own.
Right, for up to some half-life, or
Yeah.
All right, I got you.
Northern Lights. You mentioned nature. Do I think of the Northern Lights? Would that be an example of what you're talking about occurring in nature?
I would say the most obvious example occurring in nature is the lightning stroke itself. The lightning discharge. Every discharge, the tip of every discharge contains a ball lightning precursor. And there's the example, and it's carving a channel in the atmosphere. In fact, I think I have a video right here that I think I can play.
Yeah, let's see.
Of that very event. So let me share the screen again. I'll bring it up first. Ah, perfect. Ah, I got it. I'm almost there. See it okay?
I see something.
Nice and big.
Yeah.
See it? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm now going to play it. This is high-speed photography of a lightning strike.
Okay.
Oh, that's cool.
Those are plasmoids.
Yeah, those tips are plasmoids. They carve a channel, and as soon as one is carved, that's the lightning strike itself.
So plasmoids always precede it.
This entire video is well under 1/10 of a second total of real time, where the high-speed photography caught all that.
Can you play that a couple times?
Yeah, I think
the beginning
it'll repeat.
So the channel stays for a long time.
Okay, I gotta hit the play again. See, they're all exploring the area, and as soon as one hits, that short circuits.
Oh, I see. As soon as one hits the ground, then the lightning follows that.
Right.
I missed that the first time.
It carved the
I get it.
channel.
Go
Isn't
back.
that cool? I'll back it up.
And there's plasmoids along the stream of the lightning too. Afterwards, that's very interesting.
So the precursor, every single discharge has this precursor. Even when you rub your feet on the rug and touch the doorknob, every single electric precursor.
Why does it do that? Why does it do that?
So there you go.
But why does it do that? That's so bizarre. What is going on with that?
The nature abrupt discharges tend to make the ball lightning event, and the answer is because what does a thundercloud comprise of? It comprises of charged droplets of water, because a cloud particle is nothing more than a micron-sized droplet of water, and because of the frictional charging, it's very, very strong. And so for every lightning event, you probably have millions, if not billions, or even trillions of these events occurring on the lightning event itself. And why the lightning is so powerful. And so that was my presentation in 2015. It's in the water book
you could put that
as
up
well.
on-
Thunderclouds and the zero-point energy. So I proposed at the International Water Conference that every lightning strike is an event tapping the zero-point energy, and that's why the thunderclap is so huge and so concussive that it makes a tremendous force, and the source of the force is the zero-point energy itself. And so the key was mimic that in the combustion chamber, make a thunderclap engine.
All right, so how do they do that with the HHOs?
There we go.
There's
okay.
I want to see lightning within water in a machine.
There you go.
Now.
There we go. So I'll turn off the
He's
sharing
got
so I can readjust the.
Excuse me.
Well, I would just simply say that again, the lightning we just saw, Jeff, you said, why does it do that? It's because it's far from equilibrium. There's a whole lot of, I guess, negative charge built up in the cloud. The Earth is negative charge. The cloud is positive, and that's creating a great, equilibrium dysfunction. And the lightning is just trying to equalize that. And that's why we get these abrupt events.
So I guess what
that's the very thing we're trying to get the essence of.
What I'm most interested in is when the ball actually touches. Why is it all of a sudden it create a change?
So
in
once
the sky?
the channel is created,
it carved a channel, the ionized channel. Now all the current could flow in that channel.
Yeah, you see, but I don't understand that. How is it doing that?
Job is done.
Because it made.
But what was his job? What did it do? Yeah.
That channel was like is a conductive channel. Makes like a conductor, like a wire. Prior to that, the air is an insulator. Yeah. So we had to make a channel.
So it just charged up all the air around that, then touched the ground, and then the moment it touched the ground, it changed the ground somehow, and then
the ground had the whole thing the electrical ground. That's completed the circuit because there's a huge charge separation between a cloud and the ground.
Right.
As soon as you separate the circuit, I believe the electrons are at the bottom. As soon as you complete the circuit, boom, then they fly up like a short circuit.
Okay.
Right up the channel, as if the channel was a wire. Right, it's a conductive channel. Prior to completing it, we didn't get the. Imagine it that way. And as soon as I complete the circuit, boom, I have a short circuit. Right. Now all the electrons can flow into the channel.
It's like bringing a circuit together, flipping a light switch on. All of a sudden, boom, everything happens.
Yeah, and that event you're seeing there, I don't know if it's 10 milliseconds. I forget what the total is. To get that down, finally found the path to carve the path in about 10 milliseconds, and that completed the circuit. And the lightning stroke is all the electrons flowing it. That's what you see is the lightning event.
No, dumb question.
Electrons are actually flowing up from the Earth to the cloud. Yeah.
A dumb question.
Dumb question.
You hear the phrase, there are no dumb questions.
Good.
Well, we can come up with a few, I think.
Oh, so I'm the king of that.
I came up with one. I'll tell my story.
All right. Well, all right. Actually, it's devil advocate question. Are there any other lightning videos showing this? Because what I've seen is lightning. It takes on many different forms. So it would be nice to see many of these to show, hey, this one's doing it, this one's doing it. They all have these plasmoids coming out. Have you looked at a variety of videos with this?
Yeah, I've seen some. I think just Google high speed photography lightning.
All right, I'm gonna do that.
And then you'll see others observing it. That one happened to be one of the better ones because of all the little ones fired off all at the same time.
Okay, that's fine as long as it's witnessed in all or most, then I'm good. Okay, because you say they all proceed. This precedes all lightning strikes. So in
fact all
a lot
discharges.
Okay.
So that was I think it was Pappas. He gave a presentation in the 90s. He says the anomaly occurs on every single abrupt electric
good. All right.
including rubbing your feet. So if you make these discharges, like rubbing your feet on the rug and touching the doorknob, there's energy devices essentially based on that principle.
That's right.
They're all, and so this is the key. If I make these things, can I harvest them? Mm-hmm. Right? And there's a number of ways to harvest them. Can I harvest the EMP that comes off of them? That's the electromagnetic pulse, and build it up. This talk, by the way, I showed examples of that. That would be the Hyde invention. Can I take advantage of the fact that it has this abrupt propulsion event? And
that's important. And does that happen in the vacuum?
And that is the let's see. I'll share the screen again. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm getting to probably right to the point of why does it happen in the HHO devices.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the key thing we're trying to make, is take advantage of the propulsion. And then charged fog particles are very strong. They played a role of the liquid metal. And that got us to, and if they're not charged, right, just use a transducer, a little fogger. You're familiar with that. There's piezo vibrators that make fog. Fog's very weak, and gossamer just goes right back to water. It's very weak. But Walt Jenkins was the inventor that I've honored, because he, in my opinion, came up with the simplest of the devices, and he brought out of the noise, so to speak, or was it hydrogen or is it something else? He avoided using electrolysis. We could prove
And
this
by the
point.
way, Moray, you of course you did too, but we both got to witness Walt Jenkins a couple of years ago before he passed away, riding a motorcycle that was powered by water.
Yeah, and he had a
We saw it.
generator. You know, unfortunately, it broke in transport, so he never could demonstrate that. I think a generator is a better experiment because you can measure input output,
Right.
and runs at a constant velocity. So that so how can the fog particles be the fuel? Because they're nothing more than a symmetric droplet of water. And if they're subject to an abrupt electrical discharge, you expect them just to blow apart. But if it's strong enough, the surrounding plasma dimples it into the torus form and then makes the ball light. So that's the basic idea. So we got to get a strong particle out of, and that's exactly what Walt Jenkins was describing in his patent. So the big breakthrough for me occurred in 2016 when I learned of his work. In 2016.
Before you go on, can you go back to that charged fogs image right before before it turns into the plasma?
Right there, the torus image.
Is that a bubble?
Yeah, in fact,
forms a bubble shape to that
water.
It starts as a bubble,
Mm-hmm.
and then the electrostriction from the surrounding plasma dimples it in to the torus form of plasmoid, the plasmoid form to go from this to this.
I see. Okay, so plasma is a fourth state of matter. So are we just basically turning a liquid into a gas into a plasma very quickly? Is that happening?
Yeah, the idea is to turn it into a vortex ring of plasma very
Mm-hmm.
quickly, not just
the ring,
random plasma.
Right.
That is the key, and you need the strong particle to do it. And it turned out that charged water droplets are strong. Wow. The charged fog is strong. That's why every thundercloud has an abundance of these, and so every thunderclap event propels who knows the number? Millions, trillions, we don't know because they're all tiny, but we know the thunderclap itself is extremely powerful and a extremely powerful, forceful event. And it's that event that moves the piston.
And fog is very dangerous. If you light, my neighbor was telling, he says, everyone knows not to light a fire in fog. And he did it anyway, and all of a sudden torched the whole yard because the fog will just ignite everying. Like,
interesting.
I never heard that. He told me.
Well, right. Well, it's interesting because it needs to be strong, and typically you need an abrupt electrical event to convert it over from the spherical strong sphere into the vortex ring. That's the critical step.
But I'm wondering if this happens a lot in nature, like, they say don't light fires on foggy days here, and we're the forests. So neighbor did it anyway, and
yeah, that's more I would think that'd be unusual because you'd think, it's just water, right? It's not a volatile gas, so it's unusual.
I think so.
But maybe abruptly lighting the flame could possibly.
I think it's a spark. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to ask him more, but it's fascinating when you brought up fog. It's the first thing I thought because it was only last month he was talking about that.
And we want charged fog, and that's exactly what we get off of the electrolyzers on the HHO. But Walt Jenkins did one better. He made them directly and didn't use electrolysis to make the charged fog particles. And then I think.
How did he make them?
I'll show you. That's what the patent was about.
Yeah, sorry I interrupted.
So he actually I'll show you right away. So he has the ultrasonic fogger, and that frequency 1.6 megahertz. Why that? That's because it makes a lot of visible fog. You could buy these things out of China, and they sell them as decoration. You can put it in your pond, and a lot of fog will come out of the pond. So you just discover that makes a nice abundance of visible particles. And the visible particle is on to see a cloud particle. It's on the order of a half micron in size, 1/2 to a micron. If it's smaller than that, you don't see it. I used charge grids surrounding his fogger, and that was the key. That's what turned me on to his work. In addition, he, in his patent, described using a wide plasma spark plug. He said the Tesla coil sphere inspired him to do this. And he fires it for the full downstroke of the piston, much higher voltage on the spark plug. And basically, he's mimicking a thunderclap when he converts these to ball lightning. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question about when maybe this invention others as well, but water is known to have extremely high surface tension. And so my thinking is, well, if you have fog, obviously the smaller the droplets get, the more surface area you're going to have per volume of water. And is that going to contribute to somehow getting an effect? In other words, is the size of the droplets important at all in creating this fog? And do you get more effect when the particles are smaller because there's so much surface area, or doesn't that seem to matter?
It turns out what counts is strength of the particle. The big surprise that occurred. I'm just going to. Okay, I don't quite have it, but I'm going to jump to this slide. This illustrates the strong fog particle. The surface plasma converting to the ball lightning. Now I'll get to his gasoline part of the experiment because this was the goal, to mimic a thunderclap. We're converting those guys over to microscopic ball lightning, which has the propulsion effect, and rather than work with the wide plasma spark plug, which is very difficult to do for the pure experiment because it's hard to get the plasma out, the particles. If you use a little bit of coating in his experiments of gasoline, this is what he did on the particle itself, he'd have the plasma right where he wanted it. Now, I personally said this makes it not a definitive experiment because you involved a secondary fuel.
Yeah, it's the first thing that popped in my head.
And then I said, this is not really for the world to do. What we want is we want to make a more pure water device. But he tried, and he had a difficulty because of this part of the device, and as well as to get the plasma out there. So he never did claim this actually worked. But making the strong, and so that's how far I believe he took it, even though he talked about this in the body of the patent. But what I suggested is, having a little bit of hydrogen fed into the system, perhaps from an auxiliary electrolyzer. Now you don't want to make your hydrogen in the main chamber where you are charging the water with the grids, because you'd like to charge the water droplets just like a thundercloud does, a pretty high voltage, but it's high electrostatic voltage, so it's not a lot of current, so not a lot of energy. But it would be too dangerous to introduce hydrogen into that chamber. But if you had an auxiliary feed that uses an electrolyzer for just a little bit of hydrogen, then when you put it in combustion chamber with the charged particles, now you have flash from the hydrogen ignition that makes the plasma that converts the charged water particles to the ball lightning form. So by combining the two ideas, he was trying for a pure experiment. He didn't want to use electrolysis, but I said a little bit of electrolysis is okay. And what I learned, and I don't have this in this particular slide deck, but on this, where my presentations that focus completely on Walt's work, like I just presented last year, I show that having auxiliary hydrogen, and also on standard electrolyzers, what they found out in those that had a lot of turbulence would scrape off charged nanobubbles off the grids, and they were surprisingly strong because they were charged. Nanobubbles of water or nanobubbles coming off electrolysis will contain a little bit of hydrogen or oxygen, depending on what electrodes you bring it off of. they're strong, and surprisingly so, and it surprised the scientific community how strong nanobubbles can be, especially when they're charged. And they that got proven under a microscope while tracking individual bubbles that indeed nanobubbles can exist, and that's exactly what comes off of in electrolysis. Typically, the nanobubbles form, they gradually grow to microbubbles and burst open and release the hydrogen. And those devices that were very successful due to vibrations or turbulence of rubbing water or blowing air through it, different devices had successes. They were able to scrape the nanobubbles off the electrodes early and took advantage of the fact that they were strong. And now they entered the combustion chamber. And now we had the ball lightning, strong particle to make the ball lightning around it. And those were the successful devices that would run on water, just from coming off of these exotic type electrolyzers. And so you had maybe a handful of successful inventors that were that successful. They didn't quite know why it worked, but it was very typical. The nature of their electrodes with very narrow spacing, turbulence. Archie blew, he ended up blowing air through his. We're scraping off the nanobubbles early while they're quite strong, the charged nanobubbles, and those convert over to the ball lightning.
All right, so I want to summarize the technology because I built one.
Do too.
All right, I'm gonna tell you the way I build it and what it came from. So because I think that I didn't. This is a bit different than what I worked on. All right, so what I did, I think it was 16 to 24 plates. I don't remember the exact number, and they're separated and they were stainless steel, food grade stainless steel, kind of thick, and you charge one side. Basically, you're building a capacitor with all these different levels. You submerge it in water. Oh, there's a couple other things you got to do. You got to prime the plates. You can do it with very corrosive, or what do they call it, hard water, where it's like leaves that white film. That actually kind of produces the bubbles even better. But they found by sandblasting the plates is a really great way. So you get these craters on the plates so that the microscopic bubbles can form off the top. And once you submerge it, then you give it a certain frequency, and the frequency depends actually on the quality of the water. So distilled water has a different frequency than salt water, than tap water, and so on and so forth. So you give a certain frequency. I don't remember the exact volts in amps, but it was like some oddly, usually pretty close together, like 10 volts and 10 amps. And then you give this frequency, and all of a sudden these bubbles form in the water, and as it comes out, that water and those bubbles can be ignited. So you put them in, they become flammable. So what one guy, the first time I saw it, he had a truck, it was like an old pickup truck, and he had the tub of the water going in, the tub of the water coming out, and then that would go to the engine. And he just took a little lighter and showed the water is flammable. And everyone's like, that's not water. And he picks up and drinks it. He says, it's water.
Right. Essentially, it's the hydrogen.
But that's the next question I have, is because some people have done the studies on this and they don't find any free hydrogen in it. And so a lot of people are saying, well, then there's error in their testing, or maybe it's not hydrogen itself, but something happens to water. You're saying it's the hydrogen specifically.
Well, it's natural if you're doing electrolysis. You'll have some hydrogen. And actually, you want it because we need the plasma. We want it. We want some hydrogen ignition.
Okay.
Because we want the plasma from flashing it. Then you can use ordinary spark plugs. You don't have to do anything fancy. So there's two effects occurring. We definitely have a hydrogen combustion event, and that gives us plasma. And we also have the charged particles of water that gives us the ball lightning. Mm-hmm. So it's a combination of the two events. And here's a good clue that you really have ball lightning, and people know this. If you spray water mist into a normal gasoline engine, right, they say that's a stupid thing to do, even though it seems like you get more power, and you actually do. But what do you see? You see cratering of the piston. You see damage in the cylinder. And to me, that's actually a good sign. It says, oh, those are the ball lightning strikes. They're the EV strikes that make craters. And so that's to be expected. To say, yeah, I'm making it, and it does damage the piston. So you have a secondary problem. If indeed the propulsion is from the ball lightning, you want the particles. If you let them be big, like water mist particles, you'll make the ball lightning craters will be too big, and you damage the equipment. You damage the cylinder, and this damage is well known, right? Yeah, they say it's stupid to spray water mist into your engine, even though it makes it more powerful. It's because you're damaging it. So what you do is you would prefer, the solution is make smaller charged particles, not the big ones from water mist, but maybe even smaller than fog particles by running your ultrasonic transducer that makes the fog, run it at a higher frequency to make smaller fog particles. You may not even see them, but they're there as long as you have charged small particles.
Yeah.
Then when they're tiny, and you have maybe instead of millions, you might have billions per event, they act like sandblasting, like a smoothing effect on the chamber itself, rather than damaging with craters.
Yeah, it starts to form itself.
Smoothing action.
Yeah.
And that and Walt Jenkins mentioned that in the body of his patent, and I thought it was a terrific idea. And I said it's common sense. The higher the frequency, the smaller the particle. But this kind of a difficult experiment. Where's the magical zone of some type of resonance that these particular high frequencies generate a lot of them? We actually don't know because this hasn't been explored. And there hasn't really been any motivation to explore it until maybe Walt Jenkins' invention to say it. So to summarize, Walt explicitly made these particles in addition to and then compared to electrolyzers where they were accidentally making them, and some electrolyzers made a lot more of them than others, right? So now we have an explicit thing to try for. And if we find indeed that the fog particles at a half micron are still a little too big because they still do too much damage to the piston, then we can explore going to higher frequencies to make smaller fog particles. Okay, you're up.
Okay, I just like to really very basic level stuff, just remind people that may not know this, that the fuels that we typically run on gasoline engines are made from what are called hydrocarbons, because they're hydrogen and carbon. And generally it's pretty well agreed that it's not the carbon that's doing anything. It's just kind of something that's coming along with the ride and creates all the exhaust things that we don't want. But it's essentially the hydrogen, and when we're talking about water, we have hydrogen and oxygen. And so it's got the same components that we're interested in when we're looking at fossil fuels. That's the first thing. Second thing I wanted to point out was we talked about two different things. One was fog particles, which are particles of liquid in a gas, versus nanobubbles, which they're called nano because they have nanometer size, roughly, they're roughly spherical. And those are, you're talking about a liquid with gas, spheres inside it. So it's just almost the opposite, I guess you could say. And those are formed from some electrical phenomena, various ways to create these nano bubbles. And those are the things that, again, the gas that's inside each of these bubbles is some of it mostly hydrogen, I suppose, and they're charged, and therefore those are the things that we're really interested in. The smaller they get, that's what Dr. Moray was just saying, the more potency, the more potential they have, I guess, for being able to harvest some sort of an effect with that. Have I summarized that right?
Yeah, and you might have more of them. But the key thing is kind of simple. Whether it was a nanobubble scraped off that happened to be stable because we got it off early and it cocooned some charge, or explicitly making the charged droplet in a fogger that has charged grids, the end result was a tiny symmetrical strong particle and it was charged. That's what made it strong. And then surrounding that with the plasma to make the ball lightning. So it didn't really matter what you used to make the ball lightning, other than you're trying for the most benign form you can to avoid damage, just from a practical engineering point of view.
So
and then what Walt, I guess to summarize, what Walt had was what I call practical retrofit. He says, okay, it's hard to do the experiment, but a little layer of gasoline on the bubble itself is all that I really need. And then because when I ignite it with the spark plug, I have the plasma right where I want it, surrounding the particle and converting it right to the ball lightning. Using you could say using a little bit of gasoline. So and the way you can tell you're onto something, and this Walt was hoping to have traction with, is you're harmful than the amount of gasoline you used. And then you say, oh, he makes a practical retrofit that says, gee, I can use 100 times less gasoline, because it wasn't really the gas that was propelling the piston. Typical combustion is I heat the air in the chamber, the hot air expands, and that's what moves the piston from the heat from the ignition itself. On this new hypothesis is essentially, I am making this ball lightning event, a lot of them, in the combustion chamber itself. The self-propulsion of the ball lightning entities is what moves the piston. Basically the flying saucer-like warp drive that these EVs or ball lightning entities exist. They're moving the piston, therefore the source of that energy is the 0-point energy. And I'm only using an auxiliary energy sources to get those things converted from a particle into a plasma or into a plasma vortex ring. And whether I use a little bit of gasoline or a little bit of hydrogen from an auxiliary electrolyzer, and that's my recommendation. Now you're coming full circle back to people using the electrolysis. You're combining Walt's idea of making charge fog particles safely, because I only, the chamber that was making the charge fog, I didn't introduce hydrogen there. I introduced the hydrogen component at the end as I'm feeding the engine. So you kind of make a dual technology type device as the practical fit. Now you hardly needed to make much hydrogen. It was only to be the catalyst by providing plasma. And so you're self-running your device, your generator. I recommend generators because you can measure everything and they're easy to work with. They run at one speed. You make the event and you hardly used any of your output energy to run your electrolyzer, because you didn't need that much hydrogen. That was not the source of the propulsion. It was strictly the source of the plasma. Now you made a convincing all-water device that, if indeed you can show it self-runs with a little bit of excess energy, you prove the point that something remarkable is discovered, in a sense, very simply, because you didn't need that much energy to drive the electrolyzer, because you didn't need that much hydrogen. And you don't need that much energy to drive the grid, because it only needs to be electrostatic, which means high voltage or low current. And so the key component was the charged particle, the charged fog particle. We just had to get that converted over into the ball lightning form, exactly what happens in a thunderclap. And does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah,
so that also
absolutely.
explains why most people I see are running with both the gasoline and the water. But that's good enough. They're reducing their gas costs. They have semi trucks can run on a tenth or 50% of what their original costs were. And on this, I'd like to bring up one last thing before we end, and we can discuss this issue if we can. There's kind of, after speaking with a lot of people who have retrofitted their own vehicles and retrofitted friends' vehicles with these HHOs, there's kind of like an unwritten rule between the powers that be and people who want to build these. And it's not that the powers that be ever responded, it's the fact that they didn't respond, which makes them think, hey, we're onto something. Is that we're fine building these, we're fine retrofitting our friends' cars, we're fine retrofitting our own cars. It's when somebody starts marketing it, trying to market it, somebody starts going public, somebody starts going on the news, that's when all the research disappears with that individual.